Oh, the humanity. On May 6, 1937, a luxurious German passenger airship, marketed as the peak of elegance and wealth, attempted to dock at the Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey after a transatlantic flight. Dozens of spectators gathered to watch the massive Zeppelin. It was 804 feet long, which is nearly twice the length of a Boeing 747. It also weighed nearly 500,000 pounds. But it only carried 97 people. The beautiful airship began to descend from the clouds, preparing itself to land. Then, without warning, disaster struck. You see, the ship was maneuvering during a thunderstorm and garnered a static electric charge within its metal frame. Normally, this wouldn't be too much of an issue if the ship was using helium, as it was quite literally designed to use it. But for political reasons in 1937, the United States refused to export helium to Germany, and so individuals would go on to fill the airship with hydrogen instead, an extremely flammable gas. Even though the Germans knew this was very dangerous, they did it anyway. And so, as the Hindenburg hovered above the mooring mast, it dropped its landing ropes, which is theorized to have created a spark. In a flash, gigantic flames erupted near the tail of the ship, and within seconds, the entire airship was engulfed in fire, while it was still flying in the sky. The hydrogen gas keeping the Zeppelin afloat ignited into a breathing inferno, turning the proud airship into a falling torch as it floated 200 feet off the ground. People inside struggled for survival as the interior became an oven of smoke and flames. Many people and others collapsed from smoke inhalation. Ultimately, passengers became faced with the horrifying reality that their only escape from the ship was to jump 200 feet to the ground. People leapt from the burning craft as it collapsed to the ground in just 34 seconds. The screams of passengers became mixed with the roar of fire, and terrifying enough, 36 people would perish from this disaster. But what really made this tragedy unforgettable was the live radio broadcast. Remember that this was going on in 1937? Many people never saw or even heard of things like this, especially on radio. Reporter Herbert Morrison, who was covering the landing, was overcome with horror as he cried out words that would echo through history.
All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it. I don't do it. I can't talk to people.
Oh, the humanity, a phrase that became synonymous with the disaster, leaving many others to shout the same thing whenever witnessing another tragedy unfold. The Hindenburg is a haunting reminder of how quickly human ambition can be consumed by flame and political strife. In terms of recent politics in the US, a lot has been going on. But don't let violence scare you, and don't let strife divide you. Love your neighbor as you would love yourself, and treat others how you wish to be treated. Tina's Burritos. It was just another night in Vernon, California, a strange industrial pocket just south of downtown Los Angeles, the kind of place with only a couple hundred residents, but sprawling with massive factories that keep the city supplied. One of those factories is Tina's Burritos, a plant that's been churning out frozen burritos for over 40 years, producing nearly 1 million burritos per day. But on this night, the factory floor turned into the scene of a nightmare. At around 9 p.m., a 19-year-old custodian was tasked with tending to the plant's massive meat grinder. The contraption was full with burrito meat and was waiting to be cleaned, and so, as expected to by his job, he began climbing into the inside of the machine to clean it. In this case, the burrito meat grinding machine was not locked, nor was it secure. It's still unclear as to whether an item fell and caused the machine to turn on, or if an employee decided to try to make another batch of burrito meat. But, unfortunately, while the 19-year-old was inside of the machine cleaning out the meat, he would hear the industrial mechanism slowly power up and lock into place. The man panicked and shouted for the machine to be turned off, but his cries fell on deaf ears. Once fully turned on, the machine began grinding. His screams echoed across the factory, finally grasping the attention of workers who then rushed to stop the machine. But by the time it finally shut down, there was nothing anyone could do. Paramedics and firefighters arrived, but the scene was already unspeakable. The young man's fate was already sealed. Unfortunately, he was gone in a way too dreadful to describe. The plant shut down immediately. OSHA investigators arrived, and like similar tragedies before, first responders were faced with the grim task of recovering what was left of his body. The process nearly took an hour for them to complete. The dumbbell incident. It was a late evening inside a small gym in Medapalli, Telangana. The clients had finished their training, the weights were racked, and the silence was broken only by the clink of iron as a 34-year-old trainer and owner cleaned up his facility. But then, out of nowhere, the calm was shattered. 3 men walked into the facility, and for some odd reason, an argument broke about between the two parties. As the feud reached a boiling point, without warning, one of the men grabbed a heavy dumbbell and drove it into his face, instantly obliterating the man's head. The men began smashing the trainer's body with dumbbells, striking his chest again and again, with each blow being more devastating than the last. The trainer's body was left mangled on the ground, and the place that he had once built to help people improve their bodies and strength now became his final battleground. The assailants fled immediately after, but luckily they were caught by the gym's security camera as they disappeared into the night. The man was rushed to a nearby hospital, but the injuries were too severe. Doctors fought to save him, but he succumbed during treatment. Investigators believe the motive may have been personal, a suspected love affair or twisted grudge. Something definitely not worth a human life. Costume malfunction. On October 31st, at a thriving Halloween carnival, a 51-year-old man would step into the bustling streets dressed in a costume of burlap and straw, eager to join the thousands celebrating beneath pulsing lights and music. But in a sudden, tragic turn, the man's night of festivity shifted into pure trauma. The man joined the crowd in an energetic dance, and in the midst of the excitement, he wanted to take a break and light a cigarette. In his attempt, the flame from his lighter caught the edge of his costume's hood, and in an instant, his entire outfit ignited. Due to its material, the costume was extremely easy to burn, but difficult to put out and take off. The man would try ripping the costume off of his body, but its contents had already begun melting into his skin. As for the crowd around him, they at first thought it was a prank or some sort of fire stunt woven into the Halloween event. It should be noted that most of them were heavily intoxicated, so their rationality and judgment skills were extremely impaired at the time. As the blaze spread violently, it swallowed him whole like a torch. His figure staggered into the mass of dancers engulfed in fire, with his arms flailing in a desperate panic. People continued cheering. Individuals were so impressed by the stunt that they had begun to record the screaming victim. Only when the man's screams got louder than the music at the carnival did a few sober witnesses realize what was going on. They rushed in to help and tried to rip off the burning pants and jacket that were now clinging to his skin. People took water bottles from their backpacks and emptied it onto the blaze, while others in the crowd continued chanting, snapping pictures, and dancing to what they perceived as a stunt. When the flames finally calmed, he was barely recognizable. Despite being rushed to the hospital, the man ultimately passed away from his wounds. The tanning incident. On a quiet Friday evening, a 39-year-old Indianapolis man walked into a Planet Fitness on Hardigan Street. He checked in, went about his routine, and got ready to leave after finishing everything he needed to finish. But before he left, he decided to make a quick stop in the gym's tanning bed to give his skin a nice finish. It was quick. The man hopped into the tanning bed and was blasted by tanning lights for 10 minutes, left the gym, went back home, and slept happily ever after. Except that's not what happened. You see, the man's car was left parked in the gym's lot it never left, and his family became extremely worried when he didn't return home for a day. One day turned into 3 days, and before you knew it, the truth finally came out. The man struggled with an addiction that I can't mention on YouTube. It's speculated that the man had consumed some of the substance before slipping into the tanning bed, and while the machine tanned his skin, he quickly realized that he had consumed too much of the illegal substance. He began convulsing while trying to escape the tanning bed, but it would be to no avail. For 3 whole days, the man would remain stuck inside, with his body trapping the energy from the device's UV lights, causing him to become disfigured. Finally, a staff member of the Planet Fitness discovered his body locked inside of the tanning bed. He had been there since Friday, alone, silent, and hidden in plain sight. Authorities were immediately called when they found him, and by the time police and investigators pieced it together, questions were everywhere. Why did it take so long for someone to find him? Why did no alarms go off? And was it really just the substance he consumed that caused him to become stuck in the tanning bed? His mother later confirmed he had been struggling with an addiction, but she still remembered him as the kindest person with the softest heart. The hammer. It was supposed to be just another night, until a game turned into a motive for murder. In Russia, a young man was told by his parents to stop staying up all day and playing computer games overnight. His mother took away his keyboard, hoping to enforce some discipline, but unfortunately, his obsession was darker than anyone realized. That night, while his father slept, the youngster crept into his bedroom with a sledgehammer. Yep, he literally showed up with a 20-pound sledgehammer. He carefully covered his father's head with a plastic bag to ensure no mess would be made. Then he lifted up the heavy tool and swung it down at his head. He struck him woefully with 6 brutal swings. And sadly, his father would never wake up. Even though it was his mother who took away his keyboard, he decided to attack his father instead because he was afraid that he'd wake up and stop him. After the vicious ambush, he demanded his keyboard back from his mother. He then went to his room, locked the door, and went straight to his computer setup where he would engross himself in an endless binge of gaming for hours until police were called. Thankfully, he was arrested and formally charged for what he did to his father. Relatives described him as reclusive, spoiled, and completely lacking discipline. With his father gone, he had finally believed that he was the head of the family, but bludgeoning your father with a hammer so that you can play games doesn't make you into a man. Unfortunately, it sort of makes you the opposite. A 23-year-old mother in Hong Kong would continue navigating her life in an environment tainted by hardship. She was an orphan as a child, and as she grew up, she became addicted to abusing substances and other things. She worked at a nightclub in one of Hong Kong's red light districts, Tsim Sha Tsui, where a 34-year-old mob boss frequently visited her for services. The gangster was known to be extremely dangerous as he had a horrible temper and would often do cruel and unusual things to people who wronged him. One day, after the two met with each other, the mobster would accidentally forget his wallet at the venue. Upon seeing that it contained 4,000 Hong Kong dollars, the woman would secretly steal it to help her own financial situation for herself and her son. The mob boss found out, and out of fear of what he'd do to her, she immediately returned the money back to him. However, he wasn't satisfied. He demanded that she pay an additional $10,000 back to him as an interest fee for her thievery. Obviously, she couldn't meet those requests. On a calm night, as the woman made her way into her apartment after her shift, she'd hear knocks at her door. It would be 3 members of the Triad gang and a young girl who claimed that they wanted to settle the dispute with a more reasonable fee. Also, side note, the young girl seen here is actually the mob boss's girlfriend. Remember how I said he's 34? Well, she's 20 years younger than that. Yeah. Anyways, as soon as the woman opened up the door, they ripped her out of her apartment and drove her to a rundown flat on Granville Road in Kowloon. It was there that her final horrific month of torture began. Her captors beat her with pipes, suspended her in the air with wires, burned her with wax and plastic, and rubbed peppery spices into her wounds. Each day blurred into the next. It was a cycle of torment designed not only to punish her, but to strip away at her humanity. Neighbors heard nothing beyond the walls, but within them, suffering was routine. After nearly a month of agony, her body could no longer endure the mistreatment, and she would pass away from the monstrous acts of the gang. Upon realization, the mob boss had his men disposing of her remains in bags and pieces to clear themselves of any evidence. However, in a grotesque and cruel twist, the boss would have her skull boiled clean, polished and preserved, and then stitched into his girlfriend's Hello Kitty plush. Actually, I don't really feel comfortable considering her his girlfriend. I mean, the man's quite literally old enough to be her father. But nonetheless, night after night, the young girl would be faced with the doll as she lived with the mob boss, and he kept it in the flat they were living in. She wouldn't be able to escape the sight of the toy, and as time went on, it began haunting her. She'd start seeing hallucinations and apparitions of the woman's ghost. The spirit would follow her every day, weeping dreadfully. It'd stand by the corner of her bed, staring at her every night, and if the girl ever fell asleep, it'd show up in her dreams as well, and turn them into nightmares. In her words, she said that it kept haunting her while demanding justice. It got so bad that the girl developed insomnia, and for weeks, she'd barely eat or sleep. Eventually, she broke. She ran to a nearby department, and reports from the Kowloon police station say that she turned up at the building shaking violently. As mentioned from witnesses, rather than her saying that she has a crime she needs to confess, the first words that left her mouth were something around the lines of, "I keep seeing her. I can't sleep. Please, she won't stop crying. She won't leave me alone." She was literally traumatized. The girl told police absolutely everything they needed to know, and officials set out to arrest everyone who was involved. The 3 men. Actually, they don't really deserve to be called that. The 3 criminals were all sentenced to life in prison with a 20-year minimum before parole. The young girl was placed in protective custody, and after the trial, it was noted that she was seeing the ghost less. However, she'd still go on to experience nightmares and auditory hallucinations of the woman weeping. The last thing that was heard of her before she was relocated with an identity change was that she was being given psychological treatment and correctional therapy. The barbell incident. It was the early hours of a Tuesday morning in St. Charles, Missouri. The gym was entirely silent, and it was the kind of silent that only came when the world outside was asleep. At around 2:50 a.m., a young 23-year-old woman would be the only one in the gym finishing what should have been just another workout. She was a paramedic, the kind of person used to helping people, saving lives, and bringing the injured to safety. The woman would step into a Smith machine and rack weight onto its barbell, and then she began squatting it. The only issue was that the weight was too much for her. In the middle of her set, she began struggling. She tried hard to re-rack the weight, but no matter how hard she pushed, the bar wouldn't go up. Then, in an instant, her legs gave out. She lost balance and the heavy bar dropped with no spotter to catch it. The machine pinned her down, trapping her beneath the crushing weight. And unfortunately, since she was the only one in the gym, nobody was around to hear or see her struggle. For nearly half an hour, she laid pinned and crushed under the pressure of the weight before another gym member finally walked in and found her. But by then, it was already too late. The member tried to help and called 911, but by the time paramedics arrived, they couldn't do anything for her. Her co-workers at the Christian hospital remembered her as vibrant, full of energy, and always lighting up the room with her smile. But that promise, that brightness, was extinguished in a freak accident that lasted only seconds. Even in a place meant for health and strength, danger can hide in plain sight. If you're lifting heavy weights, always remember to bring a partner. There's been a number of times where I've gotten trapped underneath weight without a spotter, but I was fortunate enough to have friendly passerbys help me out. So even if you don't have a partner to work out with, try to work out when the gym is active and has other people in it. May this woman's soul rest in peace. The leg press incident. 8 years ago, in Vadodara, India, a middle-aged man walked inside of a gym for what should have been a normal workout. He moved from one exercise to another until he finally settled in front of the leg press machine, a piece of equipment built to test and improve raw lower body strength. The man began racking weight onto the machine until it was fully loaded with plates stacked heavy on both sides. Ahmad climbed in, positioned his back against the pad, and began pressing. At first, everything seemed fine. Surprisingly, as his legs pushed the machine, the estimated 1,000 to 1,400 pounds he was leg pressing actually moved. But then came the moment of truth, re-racking the load. He tried to lock the machine and began struggling. In an instant, his legs buckled. The massive weight came crashing down, snapping his left leg backwards with a sickening crack. The gym floor filled with screams as people rushed toward the mangled machine, the horror of the injury plain for everyone to see. But, by some miracle, the man survived. Nonetheless, the leg press still had done its damage. It had left him with a horrible, gruesome injury, and a lesson that would haunt him forever. Don't ego lift. It's not worth your legs. The shake incident. It was the end of New Year's Eve in Wales. An aspiring musician and fitness enthusiast had completed his day and decided to finish the night off by preparing a protein shake to drink. As you could guess, this was something he had done countless times before. But this time, he would try something new, because after all, it was New Year's. His friend recommended that he add a specific powder into his shake, and excited to test it out, the man put a teaspoon of the powder into his drink, blended it, and began drinking it. And then, nothing happened. The drink was just a little bitter, and so he sent a text message to his friend complaining about its taste, but other than that, he was fine. Then the man went to sleep to end his night. Unfortunately, he wouldn't live to see the next morning. You see, the powder the man put in his protein shake was just caffeine. But it wasn't the regulated kind that you'd find in your Starbucks coffee. It was pure, raw caffeine. He only put just a teaspoon of it into his drink, which doesn't necessarily sound that bad. That is, until you realize that one of those teaspoons was equivalent to 70 cans of Red Bull, and he just gulped it down in one sitting. The man shot up awake in a cold sweat. Almost immediately, his body began revolting. His heart was pounding violently, his vision became blurry, and his chest began constricting as if an anaconda was wrapped around him. He raced to the bathroom and began vomiting. His system had been overloaded with a stimulant so powerful that there was essentially nothing that could be done to stop it. Within seconds, he collapsed to the ground, hitting his head on the floor and going into cardiac arrest. Later on in the morning, his parents would find him cold on the floor and fall into a panic. They called 911 and paramedics rushed to his home, but there was nothing they could do. The cause of the tragedy was later revealed to be the simplicity of one mistake. The scoop he used to measure the caffeine powder was actually meant for protein, not for a fine, potent stimulant. This incident sparked up a huge controversy over the ethics of making something this dangerous as accessible as it was. Many argued that powders like these shouldn't be sold on shelves if such a tiny mistake could come with such a costly consequence. The death grip incident. The death grip is a risky form of holding a barbell. When you pick up the weight for bench press, instead of wrapping your thumb around the bar and securing it in place, some gym goers remove their thumbs and place them to the side. People say that this way of bench pressing helps them focus on pushing the weight more. Others claim that it makes their triceps activate. Nonetheless, it's a stylistic way of benching that is extremely dangerous. And on a Monday, at a gym in Ankeny, Iowa, a 22-year-old student at Iowa State University would find this out the hard way. The weights clanged, the music thumped, and lifters pushed themselves through the grind. For this young man, the bench press was just another part of his normal routine. It was something that he had done countless times before. That day, he made sure to fully load the bar to 315 pounds in an attempt to beat his PR max. With the plates 3 on each side, this was the kind of weight that demands respect. The man laid back and gripped the bar. But in order to really focus on doing his absolute best in this bench press, he switched his normal grip to a death grip, then unracked it. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. But before he could even attempt to bench the weight, in an instant, his grip gave way. The barbell slipped from his hands. The full 315 pounds came crashing down across his jaw, neck, and chest with unstoppable force. The sound echoed through the gym as lifters rushed toward him. Massive internal injuries were already done. His spotter and bystanders fought to pull the bar off, but the damage was irreversible. The man was rushed to the hospital, but despite everything doctors tried, he passed away from his injuries. His coach later said, "He was lifting weights, something I did with him 1,000 times. But that's the cruel truth of the bench press. It doesn't take recklessness, only a second of misfortune. I hit the gym frequently, and I won't lie, I usually find myself using a death grip whenever I'm doing bench press. But the truth is, no lift is worth your life. Always use a safe grip, have a spotter, and never gamble with 300 pounds of steel. The gym should build you up, not bury you. May this man's soul rest in peace." Raise the roof. It was just another Saturday night in Harriman, Utah, a quiet suburb 30 minutes outside Salt Lake City. At a local Domino's, orders were taken, pizzas were baked, and both customers and employees alike conversed with each other.
Since I'm closing tonight, can I get the aux?
No.
Bro, please.
No.
Please.
No! Stop asking me. Just shut up and make pizzas.
My aux is so good, man. Just look. I got Lil Poomp, 6ix9ine, Diddy, and Bebopa. Bebopa? Bedoa Booty. I also got Miles, man. Just please, dude. I want to be on aux.
Shut up! Your taste sucks. That's why your girl left you. Just make the f***ing pizzas.
However, amidst all the friendly banter, an SUV tangled in a 3-car accident would veer off its course and smash directly into the Domino's pizza. And as if the crash itself wasn't bad enough, it would also rupture a hidden gas line underneath the building. Within seconds, fire erupted. Bystanders watched in shock as flames consumed the vehicle. Inside, 2 people were trapped. That's when 2 courageous strangers risked their lives, pulling the driver and passenger out just minutes before the SUV was swallowed by the fire. As firefighters rushed in, trying to control the blaze, the building exploded. The blast tore apart the Domino's, sending debris flying into the night sky and causing significant damage to the businesses next door, a Jimmy John's and a Supercuts. Miraculously, nobody was injured and everybody survived. Even the firefighters standing near the restaurant when it exploded managed to walk away unharmed. The Domino's, however, was reduced to rubble. What had been a neighborhood pizza joint became the epicenter of one of Harriman's most destructive accidents. The Mayo incident. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening shift at a Subway near downtown Atlanta, the kind of Sunday where the streets slow down and customers trickle in for a late-night sandwich. Inside, 2 young employees were working, doing their jobs, making food, and chatting with regulars. As the customers sat down to enjoy their food, the door smashed open and a very odd-looking man walked up to the counter to order a sandwich. What happened next would quickly turn everybody's night into a complete nightmare. With what seemed like an insignificant and easily resolvable issue, tensions began to rise. The disagreement, which could have ended with a simple solution, instead festered, and the customer's anger built up until it boiled over. Words turned into threats, threats turned into physical exclamations, and before you knew it, the psychopath pulled out a weapon. In seconds, before anyone could react, fate was already sealed. The 26-year-old woman immediately collapsed behind the counter, unfortunately unresponsive, and her 24-year-old co-worker was also terribly struck, but they somehow clung to life. To make it worse, the victim's son was inside the store and witnessed all the horror unfold. Police later arrested the suspect, a 36-year-old man who lived just across the street. He was charged with multiple felonies and later booked that same night. Investigators said the entire incident started simply because he thought there was too much mayo on his sandwich. Wild Wings. It was just after 5:30 p.m. at a Buffalo Wild Wings in Burlington, Massachusetts. The dinner rush was minutes away, and employees were scrambling to prep the floor, the food, and the restaurant. That's when a simple routine cleaning would escalate into a complete catastrophe. You see, earlier that day, a worker had to mop the kitchen floor with a standard acid-based cleaner. Just a little bit later, another worker followed up with more mopping to prepare for the upcoming dinner rush. The only issue was that he was using a chlorine bleach product. The two chemical cleaners clearly state that they should never be mixed, and the employee had just begun mopping the entire floor, entirely mixing the two. On contact, the chemicals fused into a bubbling green explosion. They created a dangerous, foaming, toxic mixture that began pumping out lethal gas at high doses. The fumes spread instantly. Employees began coughing, their eyes burning, and their lungs felt like they caught on fire. One by one, people ran for the exit, but the floor was already slick with danger. That's when the manager of the building acted fast and grabbed a squeegee. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was only thinking about his team and his customers. He ran out to the floor and began pushing the toxic sludge toward a drain, trying to contain it before more people could get injured. But, unfortunately, the fumes overwhelmed him. His chest tightened, his lungs burned, and within moments he completely collapsed. Co-workers and bystanders tried desperately to get him outside, but the fumes were too strong. By the time they got to him, it was already too late. 13 people were hospitalized that day, and tragically, the only one who didn't make it out was the manager. The McDonald's incident. It was the early hours of a Sunday morning in Lima, Peru. At a McDonald's in the Pueblo Libre district, the kitchen crew was wrapping up another long, grueling shift. A young 19-year-old woman and her 18-year-old boyfriend were finishing up that night. The two had plans to attend college, and they were both saving up heavily to continue their studies. Unfortunately enough, this night would ensure that they didn't ever see that dream. According to police, the 19-year-old was cleaning a soda machine when it delivered a strong electric shock. Her body jolted violently, not being able to handle the voltage. Gabriel panicked. Desperate to save her, he quickly dropped what he was doing and rushed in to help. But the moment he touched her, the same current began surging through him too. Sadly, it immediately finished him. By the time emergency responders arrived, both of the employees were already done for. Reports surfaced that the 19-year-old had complained about being forced to clean equipment without proper gloves or boots, while also complaining of being pushed into 12-hour shifts without adequate safety gear. The 20-minute incident. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight from New York to Dallas. Instead, it turned into one of the most horrifying mid-air tragedies in US aviation history. On April 17, 2018, a woman would board a Boeing 737 carrying 149 people to take a trip back to her home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. On Southwest Airlines, passengers aren't assigned specific seats. They simply just band together in groups and pick any seat that's available. The only one left for the woman was a seat in row 14, on the left side of the plane, next to a window. After making herself comfortable in her new spot, something unexpected would happen. After the plane took off, it spontaneously suffered a catastrophic engine failure at 32,000 feet. A fan blade broke loose, ripping through the engine casing and sending dangerous shrapnel into the plane's fuselage. One piece of debris struck a window, instantly blowing it out. And as you would guess, the window it struck would be none other than the woman's. In an instant, the 43-year-old mother of two was partially sucked out of the plane. The decompression was violent. Passengers scrambled in shock as the rushing wind pulled her torso outside, leaving her head and arms flailing violently into the sky. Desperate to save her, fellow passengers held onto her legs, trying to keep her body inside the plane with every ounce of their strength. Flight attendants fought chaos with calmness, urging everyone to remain seated while the crew prepared for an emergency descent. For 20 agonizing minutes, the cabin was a battleground between survival and disaster. Despite passengers' efforts, the vicious thrashing was too severe on the woman's body. By the time the crippled jet made its emergency landing in Philadelphia, she had passed away. Times like these revealed just how fragile safety can be at 30,000 feet in the air, and how a single shattered pane of glass can mean the difference between a peaceful ride to your destination and pure tragedy. The photo incident. It was a desperate escape. A young boy longed for adventure, for freedom beyond the confines of his home in Sydney, Australia. On February 21st, 1970, he slipped past security at the Sydney airport and crawled into the wheel well of a DC-8 jet that was headed for Tokyo. He thought he'd hidden himself safely away and that he was ready to be carried across the world. But stowaway flights carry a fatal flaw. Moments after takeoff, the landing gear began to retract. While the plane was flying, the wheel well doors opened, and the boy was suddenly exposed to the rushing sky. With no warning, he tumbled out, plummeting 200 feet to the ground, with his body slamming into the earth as horrified witnesses looked on. In a tragic twist, a photographer testing out a new camera lens wanted to give the device a try. He thought to himself, what's more breathtaking to photograph than a plane on the verge of takeoff? As he positioned himself and his new camera lens to take a photo of the plane flying, he would accidentally and unknowingly capture the boy's final fall. This incident would leave behind a tragic and haunting image of a body suspended midair just seconds before doom. His parents were devastated. Reports show that in response to him running away, they would travel with him overseas to satisfy his adventurous spirit. But even at that, he still kept running away, so they sent him to a boarding school to keep him grounded and protected. Nonetheless, the boy still escaped. The blender. Airports are supposed to be gateways of excitement, the place where journeys begin. But for one man at the Milan Malpensa airport, the runway became a place of unimaginable shock. In July 2023, a 35-year-old ground worker and father of two would slip past security and break onto the runway. The man didn't have any tickets and wasn't a plane passenger of any sort, so staff and security alike would tackle him down to the ground. However, upon breaking free from their grasps, he would begin climbing onto the side of the Airbus. As the plane began slowly powering up and got ready to take off, its sudden movement caused the man to fall off. Without a second to waste, the man would jump back up and run to the other side of the plane to climb on top of it again. However, as he was crossing the left side, the jet's ginormous engine would violently suck the man inside. A jet engine's blades are razor sharp and spin thousands of times per minute. Not to mention that the deeper you go inside of it, the hotter it gets. The man instantly was blended into a red mess. His remains were unrecognizable, and the only things that were assumed to be left behind were pieces of bone, tissue, and shredded clothing. Witnesses like the aircraft marshal said the force was so sudden and violent that there was absolutely no chance of escape. He'd go on to say that one moment, as the marshal, he was guiding the plane into position. The next moment, he sees the powerful vacuum of the engine ripping a man from the ground and dragging his body into its spinning blades. The sound was deafening. Passengers on board watched in shock, realizing what had just happened. Authorities later confirmed that the man passed away instantly. Colleagues described him as cheerful, hardworking, and devoted to his family. But his passing was a chilling reminder of the brutal physics at play in aviation. One simple misstep of being too close to an active engine can erase a life in seconds, or maybe even quicker. The ghost plane incident. On the morning of August 14th, 2005, what began as a routine flight from Cyprus to Athens turned into one of the eeriest tragedies in aviation history. A Boeing 737 carrying 121 people climbed into the skies. But just minutes after takeoff, something was terribly wrong. The cabin pressurization system had been left in manual mode during pre-flight checks. As the aircraft ascended, oxygen levels dropped. Slowly, everyone on board began to lose consciousness. Passengers slumped in their seats. The pilots collapsed at the controls. And as for the plane, it became eerily silent on the inside and kept on flying at 34,000 feet in the sky on autopilot. For 2 hours, the plane would continuously fly in a circle above Athens. A massive aircraft, full of unconscious souls, drifting with no one in command. Fighter jets scrambled to intercept it, peering into the cockpit only to see the captain's chair empty and the co-pilot slumped lifelessly over the controls. Meanwhile, oxygen masks dangled uselessly from the ceiling. But then, one man moved. Flight attendant Andreas Prodromou had regained partial consciousness thanks to a portable oxygen supply. In a desperate final act, he entered the cockpit and tried to save the aircraft. Witnesses believe he attempted to steer it away from Athens, sparing the city from catastrophe. At 12:04, nearly 3 hours after takeoff, the plane eventually ran out of fuel. Despite the man's efforts to try to land it properly away from the city, the Boeing plunged into a hillside near Grammatico in Greece, leaving nobody on board to survive its crash. Investigators concluded it was a costly mix of human error and mechanical oversight. A simple switch left in the wrong position, a mistake no one caught in time. Although devastating, the lives on the plane are still remembered till this day, especially the heroic man who was able to veer the plane away from Athens city and stop it from crashing on hundreds of unsuspecting citizens. Air hoses. Contrary to belief, air hoses are extremely dangerous. Although they're often used for filling up car tires, blowing out dust in keyboards, and inflating huge bouncy castles. They also carry enough pressure to tear through skin, damage internal organs, or even be fatal if mishandled. On a calm morning in May 2011, a truck driver in New Zealand was going about his daily routine. He climbed onto the rigging between his truck's cab and trailer, a place he'd stood countless times before. But in one unlucky moment, his boot slipped, and instead of falling on steady ground, the man fell backwards straight onto his compressed air hose. The brass nozzle punctured him through his left buttock, and in an instant, high pressurized air about 100 pounds per square inch began flooding into his body. As if it were straight out of a cartoon, the man's body began to inflate in size. Air forced its way beneath his muscles and fat, separating his tissue like it were sheets of paper. His chest tightened, his skin stretched, and his face ballooned into a grotesque puff. Co-workers who happened to cross his path screamed in terror. They quickly rushed to his side, shocked at the mortifying sight. They shut off the air supply and carefully rolled him onto his side, knowing his lungs and heart were under pressure. Ice packs were pressed against his swollen neck and chest to try and ease the suffocating strain. Ambulance crews arrived as fast as they could, but when they found the man, he could barely breathe. His body literally doubled in size. It was full with so much air that every time an EMT tried to put a needle in his body to start an IV, the air would just push it right out. Doctors later compared his skin to feeling like densely packed bubble wrap just waiting to explode. But luckily for this man, he didn't explode. It took days for the air to escape his tissue, but against all odds, he survived by farting it all out of his body. Others, however, wouldn't be as lucky. Like the time a poultry worker in Mississippi got carried away with his friend while horseplaying, and for some odd reason, he decided to stick an air hose in his, yeah. The air pressure from the hose was so immense that he blew up from the inside, rupturing most of his organs in the process. Surprisingly, there are a lot of cases like this, so even though they're fun to play with, air hoses are dangerous. Always keep them in safe places and please don't misuse them. A broken heart. It shouldn't be, but true love often feels like one of the rarest things to find in life, and once you find it, you never want it to leave you. Such wasn't the case for a man who was forced to read his wife's eulogy at her funeral after he supported her for a 4-year battle against ovarian cancer. The pair were inseparable. The man became engaged to her when he was just 21 years old, and the two would go on to be married for 30. 4 years. That's nearly twice my age. And now, instead of making more memories with the companion of his life, he was making funeral speeches and writing thank you letters to those who came to the service. The amount of exertion something like this can have on one's heart is no joke. Only mere moments after the eulogy, the man was found slumped over in his house, in the middle of writing thank you letters. He had literally passed away from a broken heart. Doctors said his grief was so profound that it caused him to have a heart attack. And this wasn't just an isolated incident, it's a phenomenon that happens to many others as well. It's called broken heart syndrome, or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. It's a temporary heart condition triggered by intense emotional or mental stress that makes the heart's main pumping chamber weaken, causing it to mimic the symptoms of a literal heart attack. Soda cans. Imagine that it's a hot summer day and you've done nothing but bask in the sun's overwhelming rays of heat all morning. You're parched, so you go indoors to get yourself a nice cold can of soda. But, to your disappointment, none of the drinks were put away in the fridge. They were left out on the table, so now they're just warm and gross. You come up with an idea. You take one of the cans of soda and throw it into the freezer in order to speed up the cooling of the beverage. To wait for it to cool down, you go and watch some YouTube and then end up falling asleep. Hours pass, and you forget that you left the soda in there. Eventually, when you wake up and stumble across your fridge again, you remember that you put a soda in its freezer. Hoping that the drink hasn't frozen solid, you quickly take it out of the freezer, crack it open, and boom. Just like that. The can explodes like a hand grenade right in front of your face. This is a real case that happened to a boy in China on August 25th, 2012. Luckily for this boy, however, medical professionals were able to save him and nurse him back to health. Frozen soda cans are extremely dangerous, and in some cases, they're even lethal. Freezing them forces the carbon dioxide in the soda to create tightly packed reservoirs inside of the can that store high amounts of energy similar to a bomb. So keep your soda in the fridge, and if you do put it in the freezer, don't forget to take it out so that you don't go boom, boom. Gooning.
Hi, how are you? Good. Have you been here before?
Yeah.
Sir, you need to leave.
Yeah. Apparently, there's a couple of ways that gooning can take you out. But, so that this video doesn't get demonetized, I'll be swift on the topic. The risk of passing away from this is extremely low, especially if you're a healthy individual. However, if you're struggling with any underlying cardiovascular diseases, it's possible that excessiveness could trigger a heart attack, arrhythmia, or a stroke. On September 18th, in 2019, a heartbroken teen suffering from depression would find himself unable to ignore how his last Valentine's Day went. I don't really know how, but he snuck past his parents and locked himself away in a room where he then gooned himself to destruction. He gooned 56 times until he had a heart attack. However, I'd take this case with a huge gulp of salt because due to the bizarreness of his passing, tons of media outlets have exaggerated how he went out, often claiming that he did it 100 times and ripped his thing off his body, which is obviously just not true. Vending machines. He was infuriated. A man had just put the only dollar he had on him into the vending machine, and his snack was stuck inside of the machine floating in limbo. The problem had a simple solution. Just shake the stupid clanker. The man began rocking the vending machine back and forth over and over again until his snack finally fell and was free for him to take. Unfortunately, however, it wouldn't be the only thing to fall. The 1,200-pound vending machine would also tip over on him and crush his neck against a wall. The man would be pinned against the wall, struggling to keep the machine from fully flattening his neck, but sadly, his efforts would prove to be fruitless. He wouldn't survive to see the next day. More people pass away from vending machines than they do shark attacks. There's about 2 to 4 casualties from vending machines each year in the US. So, if the machine isn't giving up your snack, you can get angry at it, you can swear at it, but don't get into a fight with it. 10 out of 10 times, you will lose. Sudden choking. Imagine this. You're hanging out with your friends, chilling at a party, and conversing with other people while losing track of time. And then that's when it hits you. You start choking on literally nothing. It's called a laryngospasm. It's a sudden, violent, and involuntary spasm of your vocal cords that is so forceful that it entirely blocks your body's airways. Mild cases of laryngospasms last just a few seconds, while more intense cases can last up to a few minutes, which is pretty horrifying when you think about it. 1 second, you're chilling on some mobile games. The next second, you're literally fighting for your life and suffocating on nothing. If this ever happens to you, don't panic or try to gasp for extra air. Remaining calm helps your muscles relax. Take small sips of water to clear any possible irritants causing the spasm and apply pressure on the soft spots behind your earlobes. It'll help your vocal cords ease up. And most importantly, seek professional help. Restaurant signs. In January 2023, a swarm of fierce winds ripped through Elizabethtown, Kentucky. A family arrived at their favorite local Denny's to start their morning off with some warm pancakes and coffee, an entirely questionable option for breakfast. No offense. However, towering above the Denny's parking lot was an 80-foot sign weighing more than a ton. To most, the sign was a glowing beacon for bacon, eggs, and pancakes. But for this family, it became the last thing they'd ever see. A 72-year-old woman sat in the car with her husband and daughter when a storm outside struck. The pole groaned under the wind's pressure, then, without warning, it suddenly snapped. The massive sign came crashing down on the car, crushing the roof and trapping the family inside. Unfortunately, the 72-year-old lady didn't survive its impact, and her husband would also go on to pass away from the injuries the accident gave him. There are multiple cases where restaurant signs, gas station signs, and storefronts fall on people. So, never be discouraged to keep your distance from an unstable-looking board that's giving you an off feeling when you're entering a business. It might just save your life. Sneezing. We all do it. You're sitting in a job interview, or in a library, or in front of your date, and then you feel it coming. The the tingling sensation that tickles the small hairs inside of your nose, letting you know that you're about to sneeze. The natural thing to do is to let that sneeze fly. Well, while trying to not make a mess. But oftentimes instead, we just find ourselves stifling the sneeze. Don't. My anatomy teacher in high school always told us to break the habit, and honestly, it makes sense as to why. During a sneeze, if your mouth and nose are both closed, the pressure generated in the airways can surpass more than 20 times its normal amount. And in a recent case during 2023, a man sick with hay fever held in his sneeze by instinctively pinching his nose and closing his mouth. The force that built up in his airways was so immense that it literally tore open his windpipe. It's extremely rare to pass away from this, but nonetheless, holding in a sneeze just isn't worth gambling your life. Christmas trees. There's no better feeling in the world than to finish setting up your Christmas tree just in time for the holidays. Nothing beats a Christmas with fruitcake, eggnog, and a house fire. US fire departments respond to an average of 200 home fires caused by Christmas trees each year. And as you would presume, these fires lead to casualties. Christmas tree house fires are significantly more dangerous than normal fires in your home. This is because these fires usually occur at night or early morning when people have gone to sleep but left all of their decorations plugged in and lit up. They're usually caused by candles that were placed too close to the tree, faulty wires, or heat caused by all of the decorative electrical elements. And as opposed to normal house fires that are slow and steady in their startup, Christmas fires with a dry tree can ignite and spread across a room in less than just 30 seconds. So, with that being said, try not to get too carried away with your holiday spirit this year. Doing nothing. You see that signs can fall on you, beverages can explode in your face, and that Christmas trees can set you ablaze in your sleep. So you decide that the best course of action for you to avoid all danger is doing absolutely nothing. And then you explode into a ferocious blaze, so powerful that it leaves nothing but your feet behind. Weirdly enough, nothing else around you is affected. Not the couch you were sitting on, not the table in front of you, not the rug on the floor. Nothing. Just only specifically you. This is known as spontaneous human combustion, and there are many cases in the US about it. However, scientists nowadays discredit it fully and dub it as nothing more than a myth. They rather believe it to be the wick effect, which is when a person's clothing absorbs melted body fat during a fire and causes them to burn up but leaves their surroundings relatively unharmed. Others feel like this isn't a sufficient enough explanation to the phenomenon though. They argue that if the fire's hot enough to consume you entirely and leave nothing but ashes behind, then it should also scorch nearby walls, furniture, and flooring. They also say for the wick effect to be true, it needs a clear spark, like a lighter or a candle. But in many of the cases, the victims aren't found with anything heat-related. Toilet time. In Chicago, in 1987, a 70-year-old woman would board a cruise ship with her family. As they explored the wonders on board and enjoyed the pleasant feeling of being on the ocean, the old lady would be greeted with another, less than pleasant feeling. So she excused herself from her family and made her way to the ship's bathroom, and there she was greeted with the solution to her bowel troubles: the toilet. She closed the door behind her, sat on the seat, and did her business in peace. Minutes later, the ship's medical personnel would rush past the family to the bathroom where their grandma was last seen. Out of concern, the family would follow. And as if it were a scene straight out of a horror movie, they would be met with the sight of their grandma. Her insides were literally sucked out of her body by the ship's vacuum toilet. She was rushed to the emergency room once the cruise docked at a port. And even though cases like these are extraordinarily rare, toilets have been shown to cause lethal harm to civilians in other ways. Take, for instance, exploding. In 2017, a federal class action lawsuit was filed against a toilet company called American Standard after it received 300 reports of its toilets literally blowing up. And even this year, in 2025, a 20-year-old man suffered serious burn injuries after he pressed the flush button on his toilet and it responded with a loud explosive bang. He was rushed to a hospital where doctors revealed that 35% of his body was burned horribly by the explosion, but luckily he survived. The Hershey's incident. On a Halloween night in 2011, a small home on Winchester Avenue in Chicago quickly became the scene of a nightmare. After trick-or-treating, a grown 55-year-old man fell into a fury with his partner after discovering that his bag of Hershey's candy was missing. He was convinced that the 49-year-old woman had taken it, and what started as a petty accusation quickly escalated into a heated argument. The shouting grew louder and tempers boiled over. In desperation, and perhaps in an effort to also protect herself, the 49-year-old woman hurled a plate at the man's head, striking him in the face and cutting above his eye. The injury, later visible in the mugshot taken of him, only stoked his anger further. With blood dripping down his face, the man reached for a kitchen knife, and consumed by rage, he lashed out in a frenzy, striking the woman multiple times. Neighbors later recalled hearing chaos and screams echoing from inside the home. Unsure as to whether or not the noises were Halloween decorations, police were eventually dispatched to the area. When officers arrived, they found the woman gravely injured. She was rushed to Cook County Hospital, where she lingered in critical condition for nearly a week. Despite doctors' efforts, her injuries proved fatal, and she later passed on November 5th. The man was arrested soon after and booked on felony charges. What had begun as a trivial Halloween quarrel between two adults ended in one of the most brutal of ways. The Royale Incident. Addiction is a chronic condition characterized by a compulsive urge to engage in a specific behavior like drinking, substance abuse, or in this case, Clash Royale. A young man had grown so attached to the mobile game that it became the center of his life. He was a level 9 and was already at 3,600 trophies, which, honestly, is pretty impressive considering that this took place back in 2016. In those times, having just 3,000 trophies would literally place you in the highest arena. To put it into perspective for today's time, it'd be like getting to 15,000 trophies when you're just a level 12. In other words, he was a sweat. Each victory gave him a rush of validation, and each loss felt like a personal failure. His days revolved around the climb, pushing trophies, upgrading cards, and chasing more wins. Over time, his joy turned into obsession. The game that once entertained him slowly began to consume him. It was no longer just Clash Royale, the app was now his life. He took everything personal. Unfortunately for him, on one fateful night, the man would become overwhelmed by the two cards he absolutely hated the most in the game, Elite Barbs and Hog Riders. Match after match, player after player, his opponents kept using these cards with their levels completely maxed out. He began losing every round, with each loss angering him more than the last. Before the young man even realized it, he had dropped down hundreds of trophies in a single day, and at that point, something inside him broke. Rage and despair collided. The man threw his phone, got up from his seat, and began, unfortunately, I can't really show you the rest of this incident, because it turns out that it actually crosses some of YouTube's guidelines. So, maybe I'll make a Patreon or something? I don't know, but anyways, let's move on to the next incident. The Gamer Rage Incident. In June 2024, a gaming dispute took an unthinkable turn from the virtual world into real life. After receiving constant trash talk and beratement from another player on a dying video game, a 20-year-old man from New Jersey finally decided that enough was enough. His favorite video game was shutting down its servers, his life was stressing him out, and this player was still trash-talking him. The man sat down and deeply pondered how he'd go about addressing his situation, and it was at that moment that he came up with an ingenious idea. He'd go and find out where the player lived, tell his mother that he was going to visit a distant friend, and then fly 1,000 miles to the player's town. Upon arrival, he'd purchase a hammer at a local hardware store, and then found the man's house. At 2 a.m., the 20-year-old would enter through the man's unlocked door. Then he ambushed him and struck him repeatedly as he walked out of his bedroom. The man would break into a panic and completely freak out whilst trying to register the totally unbelievable situation before his eyes. Some dude he was trash-talking on an MMO was actually inside his house, at 2 o'clock, attacking him. During their struggles, the man began to scream out for help, and to his complete luck, his stepfather happened to be awake and nearby. The two of them together were able to stop and subdue the 20-year-old until deputies arrived. Although he was injured pretty badly, the man survived and received staples that had helped close several head wounds. As for the other man, Kang was arrested on multiple felony charges, and when questioned about why he did what he did, he chillingly replied by saying that the other gamer was a bad person online. The VR Incident. In December 2017, a 44-year-old man in Moscow was at home with his headset strapped on, fully immersed in a VR session. But inside his apartment, the line between the simulated world and the real one blurred. As he moved around the room, he lost his footing and stumbled hard, slamming into a glass table. The impact was devastating. Glass was everywhere, on and inside of him. As the man stood back up, he didn't even have a moment to panic or call 911. He instantly fell back down and became unresponsive. Unfortunately, investigators later reported that he passed away almost instantly. There was no chance to save him. This stood as one of the first recognized incidents where a VR caused the passing of an individual. It serves as a stark reminder that while virtual reality transports us to other worlds, our bodies never leave this one. One misstep in your living room is more dangerous than any simulated battlefield rendered on a screen. So remember to always be aware of your surroundings when you put your VR on. The window incident. As it grew dark outside, it rained and thundered on. This night was supposed to be a quiet, relaxing session of gaming for this 33-year-old man in the UK. He sat in his living room playing his PS5, unaware of the complete chaos that yet awaited him. He opened up his window for some fresh air and resumed his gaming. However, the weather of the night would have no plans of calming down anytime soon. Slowly, it began storming harder and harder outside of his house. Then, in the midst of his game, a sudden bolt of lightning struck his home, bounced off of a puddle of water outside, and then bolted right through his open window and slammed straight into his body. The impact from the lightning bolt was so immense that it launched him from his chair and shocked the living hell out of him, scarring his body with branch-like burns. But, despite how lethal lightning strikes are, the man somehow rose back up from the ground. His head was throbbing and his body was on fire, but he was completely confused, not knowing what hit him. He went to his partner and asked for a wet towel because he had a headache, but upon seeing his horrific condition, they immediately freaked out and rushed him to a hospital to be treated. Doctors and staff took him in and did the best they could do for his burns and internal shock injuries. And against all odds, he somehow survived. Even though he didn't pass away, I couldn't imagine how absolutely horrifying it must be for you to be playing video games in the safety of your living room one second and then getting struck by literal lightning the next second. Ironically enough, the man was playing Stray, and if you're not familiar with that, it's a game where you're a cat trying to find its way back to its family through, you guessed it, a thunderstorm. The Roblox incident. In the fall of 2024, a boy whose only escape was Roblox found their world warped into something unrecognizable. What had once been a game of building, laughing, and running soon became the doorway to a disturbing nightmare. As the youngster continued his gaming, he'd stumble across another friendly gamer in the chat. But on the other side of the screen was Tara Alexis Sykes, a 36-year-old woman from Pensacola, Florida. And unfortunately, she wasn't just another player, she was something far more nefarious. The woman reached into the child's loneliness and began speaking to him as if she were a close friend and someone who deeply understood him. She took her time and earned his trust, and then she revealed her true intentions. She began instructing him to harm his family members. She told him to burn his younger sibling with scalding water and to violently throw him at the tile floor. If his parents found out, she commanded him to sneak into their room at night and to do away with them. She would go on to tell him to burn their house down with aerosol and matches. But when the youngster attempted the first of these vile instructions, deputies immediately arrived to the house. They found that some of the parents' sheets were covered in spray and questioned why he was hurting his younger sibling. Paralyzed in fear, the truth finally spilled out. The kid admitted that there was a woman online who was telling him that he had to do what he was doing. It was revealed that this vile witch used a children's game to puppeteer a child into attempted murder. Sykes was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. She was held without bond and now faces decades in prison. Thank God. There are countless stories like these on platforms like Roblox. If you're young, do not talk to strangers. And if you have younger siblings, monitor them and always check up on them personally to ensure that they're safe and happy. 20 seconds. In the summer of 2013, in the Swiss Alps near Martigny, one of the world's most daring stuntmen prepared for what should have been another breathtaking descent. His name was Mark Sutton. He's a professional parachutist best known for his role in the London 2012 Olympics opening ceremony, where he famously jumped into the stadium dressed as James Bond alongside the Queen. But this time, his jump would not end with applause. Sutton launched himself into the sky in a wingsuit, soaring across the mountain valley. For 20 exhilarating seconds, he glided like a bird, cutting through the air at speeds over 120 miles per hour. It was a sight few people on Earth would ever get to experience. But then, in an instant, it was gone. At 20 seconds into the flight, Sutton lost control. His trajectory veered off the correct pathway, and before he could recover, he slammed into the side of the mountain. When they found him, his body was unrecognizable and they were only able to confirm that it was him through DNA scans. Investigators later examined footage of the jump to understand what went wrong. Nobody knows if it was a miscalculation, a heavy gust of wind, or simply the razor-thin margin of error that comes with flying inches from the ground in a wingsuit. No matter the cause, the outcome was the same. One of the sport's most skilled pioneers had paid the ultimate price, and there was no bringing him back. Friends described him as fearless, committed, and unforgettable, a man who had lived his life in moments that most people could only dream of. But in extreme sports, even 20 seconds can be enough to determine your fate. Imagine clinging to the side of a speeding train. You climb to the roof with its steel rattling beneath your feet, wind screaming in your ears, and with your body being pumped full of adrenaline. That's train surfing, one of the most dangerous extreme sports out there, although in reality it's more reckless thrill-seeking than an actual officialized sport. It started decades ago in places like South Africa, Russia, and Germany, spreading worldwide as a dangerous daredevil subculture. One of the most prominent areas train surfing has become a part of is New York. On a Saturday afternoon in the Greenwich Village, down in the tunnels of the West 4th Street subway station, trains thundered through the darkness, with their steel frames rattling the walls as they sped past. For most, it was just another commute, but for one man, it was his opportunity to go train surfing. Police say he had been riding on the outside of a southbound F train as it tore through the tunnels. For a few moments, he clung to the side of the moving car, then he climbed to the top, where he felt the rush of air and the roar of the tracks giving him a thrill like none other. I'm pretty sure most of you have played Subway Surfers at least once in your life. Whenever you hop on top of a train and make the mistake of hitting a tunnel, you'll fly off in a cartoonish manner where you're then arrested by that big back that's chasing you. You get a good laugh at it, then you play the game again. Yeah, it's nowhere near as hilarious in real life. It's horrible. As you could assume from this extremely dangerous and stupid sport, while the man finished climbing to the top of the train to get a gust of fresh air, he'd get more than he bargained for. A tunnel showed up, and before the man could even process what he saw, he lost his head. Because of the extreme amount of air pressure being thrown at his body at the moment, he fell and was caught underneath the train. At 3:11 p.m., a 911 call came in. Someone said they had seen a man slip beneath the subway earlier, and sure enough, when officers arrived, they found him under the train with his body decapitated. Whatever adrenaline he had been chasing ended instantly, and it was replaced by silence and horror in the underground. For the unfortunate commuters forced to pass the site, it was a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in the city's underground. But for police, it was just another entry in a long list of subway surfing tragedies. Quick little moments of thrill that collapse into traumatic memories that both strangers and loved ones alike will never forget. The adrenaline is never worth the risk. Your body is priceless. And while we're on the topic, the same goes for your mind. The whole reason I make these Stickmen videos is so that you don't have to witness the real thing. Don't go searching for these videos online. The effect it has on your brain is horrible, especially if you're young. Traumatizing yourself isn't worth it, and trust me, I can promise you that. The slamming incident. High in the Swiss Alps, the snow glistened under a cold April sky. For a young 21-year-old world champion snowboarder, this was more than a mountain. It was her playground, her stage, and most of all, her destiny. She had conquered countless competitions and had practically carved her name into the world of snowboarding. But on this day, the mountain carved back. The woman was being filmed for a project, showcasing her incredible skill as she cut across the steep alpine slopes. The cameras rolled, her board sliced through the powder, and everything seemed perfect. Then, without warning, the snow itself began to move. Like, a lot. In the blink of an eye, an avalanche broke loose. Tons of snow and ice thundered down the mountain, faster than any snowboarder could ever outrun. It should be known that on average, avalanches move at about 80 miles per hour. At that speed, that's enough force to topple any building, rock, or tree caught in its path, most of which are moving along with the avalanche whenever it's crashing down a mountain. It slammed into the woman with the force of a speeding vehicle, and she was swallowed by it instantly. Rocks, debris, branches, and heavy ice carved and tore at her body as she was dragged through the snow until its eventual finishing slam. Finally, the avalanche stopped, but the woman was missing. She laid buried alive deep within the frozen chaos, crushed and disfigured. Rescue teams rushed in, digging through the snow and desperately searching for her. But by the time they found her, it was already too late. Even with safety gear and avalanche detectors, the force was overwhelming. This woman, once one of the brightest and youngest stars in snowboarding, was gone in seconds. Even champions are fragile against nature. If you're an outdoorsy person like me, always be alert of its dangers. The Red Bull incident. The arena was packed and its air was alive with cheers and the violent rhythm of tradition. In the center, a matador faced down his opponent. Not another fighter, not another man, but a bull weighing more than half a ton, bred for power, speed, and fury. At first, the fight went as expected. The matador waved down his red cape and the bull charged. As you'd guess, in the background, the crowd roared at each narrow escape. With over 2 decades of experience in the ring, this 39-year-old Spanish bullfighter was known as one of the best to do it in his time. He'd toss his cape to one side, effortlessly thwarting the bull's charge. Then he'd do it again, to make the crowd go wild. But then, in a heartbeat, the balance shifted. He'd put up his cape again for the bull to charge past him, but unexpectedly, it caught him. The bull slammed into the matador's face with a force that was so brutal that the horn struck him in his skull, fracturing upward through his jaw and out his eye. He was hit directly in the head by a 1,000-pound bull's horn, effectively splitting his face in two. The crowd fell silent as blood poured onto the sand. The matador dangled helplessly, impaled by the animal until it heavily thrashed him off of its horn. The worst part is that the man was fully conscious. He rose back from the ground like a zombie and began screaming that he couldn't see, sending the crowd into a horrific panic. Other bullfighters jumped into the ring to distract the bull and to retrieve the man's body. Once again, his face was split in two, his teeth were shattered, his jaw and cheekbone were fractured, and the horn head punctured out his eye and pierced him right through his skull. But, to everyone's complete and total shock, the man actually somehow survived. The horn pierced his skull and was dangerously close to his brain, but it missed. Against all odds, he returned back to the ring less than a year later, and he'd continue his passion. Juan José Padilla is now known as the Pirate of Bullfighting. In 2018, he'd experienced another horrible incident where he was scalped by a bull. Honestly, this man might just be invincible because he'd somehow survive once more, and he'd return back to the ring again to continue the sport. Extreme sports are, well, pretty extreme, and honestly there's really nothing wrong with living life to the fullest. All I'd say is that adrenaline makes you feel invincible, but reality has no safety net. So, always, at least make sure the risk is worth the reward. As always, have a happy day.